Now, nature-based solutions are gaining traction as essential tools in climate mitigation and adaptation, but their credibility and effectiveness depend on transparency and integrity. This session will explore how MENA can lead in high-integrity carbon and biodiversity markets, valuing nature not just as an environmental asset, but as a critical driver of finance for climate resilience and sustainable development. This discussion will also highlight how advances in AI and digital tools, from satellite imaging to real-time data analytics, are revolutionizing verification, monitoring, and reporting. Now, these technologies are making carbon and biodiversity markets more reliable, scalable, and cost-efficient, strengthening investor confidence and ensuring projects deliver genuine climate, social, and ecological benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our speakers: Simon Henry, Director of Carbon Market Development, International Emissions Trading Association; Namrata Restogi, the Carbon Policy and Technical Specialist, UNDP; Talal El-Arifi, CEO of SAFA; Eric Ringvold, Chief Business Development Officer, Regional Voluntary Carbon Markets Company, moderated by Mr. Ian McCallum, Chief Sustainability Officer, Bank ABC.
Is this us? Oh, there we go. So look, thanks so much. We have got an incredibly powerful panel today. The depth of insight, I mean, is really, we're very lucky to have them all here. So they're gonna make my life easy, as it were. Just to maybe set the scene, and then I'll pass it over to the panel. To give everyone an idea, really what we're talking about, the nature-based carbon market. You're talking about the compliance market is about 800 billion, so it's sizable. Voluntary is about 2 billion. Obviously, the compliance market, dwarfs it. After that initial growth period, it's pretty much plateaued last sort of 3-4 years. So really what we're going to be talking about is where next, where the challenges are, the opportunities to unlock the growth. And just to give everyone a little bit of an understanding, what we're talking about in terms of nature-based solutions is, you're talking about forestry, wetlands, urban green spaces, coastal ecosystems, agroecology. So it's very much coming out from a much more holistic solution, where we're sort of leveraging off the power of our sort of natural ecosystems and attracting capital to fund those projects. And we'll be touching on really the full value chain of nature-based solutions. So we're talking about the project development, the origination and trading, and also the purchasing of. So just to give everyone an idea of what we're going to be touching on today. So maybe I can pass it over to the panel. It'd be great to individually, if you can introduce yourself, and in particular, just touch on, where you are in the nature-based solution space, because I think then that'll give a better idea as we go through the discussions where you're really adding value and insights. Maybe Simon, you can kick off.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you to the hosts for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to be joining the forum today. So I'm from an organization called the International Emissions Trading Association. We are the business association for carbon markets emissions trading globally. So we promote the market, we promote the use of carbon mechanisms, and provide a sort of a range of services to our members who represent the full value chain, I guess, of the carbon trading industry. In terms of nature-based solutions, we cover this sector pretty closely, both on a thematic level, but also on a more sort of regional level, I guess. So in terms of thematic level, we follow developments around the methodologies, the crediting of nature-based solutions, in terms of generating supply. So there's been a huge amount of work in the last few years around improving the crediting processes, the methodologies. These methodologies came under a lot of scrutiny in the last few years, some of which I think have been out of date, but have gone through or are going through a transformation process to really improve their integrity. And that's partly driven by new initiatives like the ICVCM, that's the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, which is a sort of a meta standard trying to raise quality in these methodologies. And so these methodologies are being improved and being scrutinized very closely now to increase the quality of supply coming from nature-based solutions into the market. So we track that, we track those developments, we support those processes, but we also then follow the use of those types of credits on a regional scale quite closely. So we follow compliance markets like California cap and trade market, where these credits can be used under a compliance scheme. And we follow them in other locations. I mean, one big market that is on our radar that is really just coming to life now is CORSIA. That's the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, which is a bit of a mouthful. But essentially, it's the carbon pricing mechanism for international aviation emissions. And that is generating a huge amount of demand. The market has actually been in existence for a while, but things have been very subdued because emissions levels in international aviation have been very subdued following the pandemic. Now that the pandemic and the impact on air travel has rescinded, fallen away, emissions are rising very quickly, and compliance obligations under that market are now accruing. So airlines are facing compliance obligations under that market for the first time. And those obligations will ratchet up over time as emissions increase. And one of the types of credits that can be used to comply with this new market or this new source of demand comes from nature-based solutions. That's both avoided deforestation, but also afforestation, reforestation. So that's generating a lot of interest. We track that. We promote this market. It's a nascent development, but we support its use. And we follow these developments elsewhere as well. So Indonesia, Malaysia, Southeast Asia, huge amount of interest in nature-based solutions because these are big sources of generation, along with the other tropical forest regions as well. And increasingly, I think, in the MENA region, where mangroves, blue carbon, as we call it, could become an interesting source of supply to this new demand that's emerging around the world.
Thanks, Tal. Please.
Thank you, Ian, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Talal Al-Araifi, CEO of Safa. Safa is currently a carbon offsetting platform that provide and as well provide credible climate solutions to companies here in Bahrain. And I think we touch the whole nature-based climate solutions from the beginning, from its origination to its trading and purchase and investment. So on Safa, we currently provide companies with the options to offset through nature-based solutions and offset their emissions. We help them calculate their emissions. But what we do also is look towards investment and project development and looking towards origination of carbon credits and just the trading setup of carbon credits here in Bahrain. It's fairly a relatively new company, a new setup in Bahrain, but there's much potential for growth.
Yeah, it sounds you guys are on quite an exciting journey, as we talked about earlier. Please, Namrata on UNDP, please.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Ian. My name is Namrata Rastogi. I also go by Nam Rastogi, so feel free to just call me Nam. I'm with UNDP, the multilateral arm of the United Nations Development Program. I sit in the Global Carbon Market team in the United States. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., with headquarters in New York City. We have the High Integrity Carbon Markets Initiative, which I will talk about more through the panel. But essentially, as far as nature-based solutions specifically go, we've been working with countries. We work across the stakeholders. We work with countries. We work with private sector. We work with think tanks. And on nature-based solutions specifically, we're working with REDD+, reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation through our UN REDD program for over a decade, and have a knowledge base that is unparalleled as far as nature-based solutions go. We've also been engaging more and more on some of the blue carbon work, and we work with governments, so helping with the readiness work across carbon markets, working with public-private partnerships like the LEAF Coalition and others. So I'll just stop there and pass it on.
Eric, last but not least.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm Eric Ringvold. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer at PIF's voluntary carbon market based out of Saudi Arabia. And at VCM, we have over the last 3 years established a carbon market in KSA that has quickly become one of the third largest carbon credit platforms globally. So what we do is we have a platform where companies, large corporates in KSA, regionally and beyond, can come and take action on part of their emissions, the emissions they have today, through the use of carbon credits. And obviously, that has a tremendous impact in the nature-based renewable space. So out of everything we do, around 20% goes to nature-based removals. So we've actually supported millions of tons of CO2 being taken out of the atmosphere through mangrove restoration, tree plantations, and hopefully over time, even more and more innovative ways to remove carbon from our nature reserves.
Great. So some really good depth of knowledge here across the whole value chain. Maybe Simon, you could kick off. We talked a little bit earlier about how the market sort of plateaued in recent times. A lot of the hot air has been taken out. It's just common practice in an embryonic market, right? How do you see the dynamics in terms of the global market and how MENA fits into that moving forward?
Sure. So between about 2018 and 2021, we saw a big growth in the market for carbon credits, mainly on a voluntary basis. We saw, I think, about a quadrupling of supply coming to market. And things probably reaching a peak, I think, around the Glasgow COP, where there was, a huge political ambition being expressed, strong corporate ambition being expressed. And since then, as you say, we've seen this plateauing. So the market is kind of at a similar level to where it was back in 2021, and hasn't really grown too much in that period. But I think a new period of growth is probably quite close. Mainly driven by compliance demand, but also probably increasing voluntary demand as well. So I mentioned in my first intervention about CORSIA, the market for international aviation emissions. That's going to add, a big chunk of demand. The first compliance period is, or the date that comes up is the end of January 2027. So we have about a year until airlines have to surrender credits under that new market. So this year we're going to see a lot of activity, I think, from airlines buying credits for that market. But we see new markets coming online and at various stages of developments all around the world at the moment. Japan this year is launching their new compliance ETS, emissions trading system. Turkey, we heard in an earlier session, is developing a compliance market. And then a lot of activity in Latin America, Brazil, moving towards a compliance market, Peru, Colombia, Mexico as well. So, many of these places will have some sort of demand for these credits as part of their compliance markets. So that's going to generate demand over the next 5 years or so. And then Article 6 as well, which is the mechanism, the market mechanism under the Paris Agreement, which has taken nearly a decade, or really a decade, to finalize its rules following the adoption of the Paris Agreement back in 2015. So it's really the last piece of the Paris Agreement rulebook to fall into place, but it is now there. So we're now starting to see Article 6 sort of roll out properly, and I think countries will increasingly use this new mechanism to comply and meet their NDCs under the Paris Agreement. So again, that will generate, I think, quite a lot of demand. It will provide a cost-efficient route to decarbonization and NDC compliance for countries. So we're seeing a growing level of interest from countries all around the world in using that. So potentially we're on the cusp of a new wave of growth in carbon credits.
And just keeping on the global perspective, Nam, be interested to hear, obviously, we talked earlier, UNDP is a little bit more on the project end of things, but it'd be great to hear, your insights from the work that UNDP have been done in this space.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Yes, absolutely. And from UNDP's perspective, and I appreciate how Simon provide the opening global trends that we're seeing in terms of supply and demand of credits. I think from UNDP's perspective, high integrity, high integrity, high integrity. I mean, I think that is the key. You mentioned it, Simon mentioned it. We've seen some issues related to the carbon markets in terms of the credibility of the credits. This relates to the nature-based solutions, and it's critical as we see this market evolve that the trust remains in the market and the trust, the legitimacy of the carbon markets remains. And how do you do that? You do that by ensuring that your credits are high integrity credits. So from a UNDP perspective, that is sort of the core of our delivery model. What do I mean by high integrity? And I'll just briefly cover that here. You have the carbon integrity, which we sort of know and have seen it being evolved from the CDM days. The credit is 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed or avoided, and it's permanent, real, measurable, and additional. I think the piece that UNDP also brings into the equation is the social integrity piece, and ensuring that there's equitable benefit sharing, there's adequate risk management of different stakeholders, especially in the case of nature-based solutions, the indigenous peoples and vulnerable communities, etc. So I can get more into it at a later stage, but I think the first point on carbon markets, where we see the trend going, given the history of where the market is coming from, is high integrity. Related to that is the demand from buyers on going beyond carbon. So community empowerment, job creation. I think we're going to talk a lot about coastal mangroves, given that we're in Bahrain, so that helps in coastal erosion. So being able to tell a story, being able to say that carbon credit that I bought is giving me carbon brownies, but it's also giving me brownie points in terms of, developing that community or creating jobs for women in the farms of Kenya, or whatever that may be. So I think that is also key. Another thing that I think we're seeing more and more is the convergence of the voluntary and compliance market. I think this market is extremely complex. And without, again, going too much into the nitty-gritty and the technicalities of this, I think we have the compliance markets in several countries allowing for the trading of voluntary carbon credits. So that's another, for those of you who are wanting to get into the carbon credit space here, that's a huge opportunity, because you're generating the credits for the voluntary market, but there is a pathway for some to get into the compliance markets as well. So I'll stop there, and I think those are sort of the general trends we're seeing from UNDP's perspective. But I want you to think about that high integrity one, and I'll be repeating myself a little bit.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch back on that whole high integrity project space and the points you were raising over that community buy-in, and the permanence of those credits is massive. I'm keen now because, you know, Eric and Talal, I mean, you guys really very entrepreneurial in terms of what you guys are involved in. And, you know, obviously from a, you know, a MENA perspective. So maybe Talal, it'd be great to hear from yourself first how you see the dynamics from the MENA perspective, the client demand, etc.
Yeah, sure. I think you've mentioned that there was a plateau with the international markets, but I think that's an opportunity for our region here, especially the MENA, because we're entering at a later stage. And we've seen there are demand. And I think the MENA region can play a very pivotal role in advancing the market for nature-based solutions. I believe we have maybe 2 or 3 important realities for the region that can play a part. First is we have high-value nature-based ecosystems that will need to be protected. Number 2 is, I think, ambition, and this has been seen in this region where we've seen sustainability being embedded in the nation's economic transformation and national economic strategies, and then with the very ambitious net zero goals. 3, I think, is there's appetite, I believe, and there's availability of capital for the right high integrity, credible solutions in the region. And I think coming in, and we've seen from some of the participants here today, that demand is, yes, demand is there from the private sector. Capital might be allocated, but what's missing is basically just having that kind of origination coming in from the region itself. I think we come in, yes, late to the party, but we come in at a time where we can learn from what has happened in other regions with the kind of negative media around greenwashing of nature-based solutions and so on. So we can come in and again, integrity is a big part, and start building high integrity, very credible nature-based solutions for the market here in the GCC.
Yeah, no, and a shout out also to Bahrain, because you know they have done some very progressive work in, say, the mangrove swamps, etc. So there's some really interesting opportunities there. Please, Eric, your thoughts in terms of, from your perspective, the MENA region and the opportunities that you've seen, both in terms of the supply and the demand side.
Well, so talked about how the global markets have been somewhat flat over the past few years. But I think the MENA region has been a particular bright spot in these markets globally. Because simply in our market alone, over the past 3 years, we've taken our market from 1 million ton in the first year to 2 million tons to 3 million tons in 2024. And then achieving 7 million tons of CO2 traded by the end of last year. So we're seeing almost a doubling in growth every single year in our market, which I think is a very, very good bright spot. And of course, I would love to say that that is driven by my great business development skills and my team's skills. But I have to humbly admit that we are in a very fortunate position in Saudi Arabia, where since day one, we've had the support from His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, who's announced how carbon markets are a very important piece in how to achieve global net zero, but also in particular to achieving local net zero for Saudi Arabia. So that has been a huge driver for us to be successful in this market. But I think most exciting about this is that we're seeing the effect that we sought out to create now take place on the ground. So when we started out around 4 years ago, there was no demand for carbon credits, and there was no supply for carbon credits in the MENA region at all. And as it stands today, we have 25 different projects taken off the ground in Saudi Arabia across all of the most innovative and exciting technologies, ranging from direct air capture, direct ocean capture, biochar, carbon negative concrete, e-waste recycling, and the list sort of goes on and on, both on the technology side and of course, as the focus today, on the nature-based side. And I think often when we think about the GCC region, or when when international markets think about the GCC region, think about this as an arid region, probably quite difficult to do nature-based removals at scale. But we would massively disagree. We see exceptionally long coastlines with temperate water, having some of probably the world's second largest potential to generate blue carbon across the coast and in the oceans, whether it's seagrasses, kelp forests, mangroves, massive potential. I think Saudi Arabia is the first or second largest state producer globally. Huge amount of biomass waste every single year that can be turned into biochar. And instead of being a source of cost, can become a source of revenue for those who are today paying to get rid of biomass in the nature space. So we see a very exciting nascent industry emerging, and hopefully that only being the beginning.
And we'll talk a little bit later about the demand side, but if we say move over on the supply side, we think of that value chain and the product development side. I'd be interested, maybe Nam, if you can go back to yourself. Where are you in terms of nature-based solutions at project development? What are some of the hurdles that you face? I mean, obviously the supply is primarily in the global south, maybe where the legal structure isn't quite as robust as other places. There's issues over land, obviously community buy-in, lead times, etc. But maybe you could give a little bit of color on some of the challenges, but also bring to life some of the exciting case studies, projects that UNDP have been involved in.
Absolutely. Before I go into that, I just want to make one comment on what Eric said. I did read about this statistic, and I thought I'd just share that really quickly. There's a 5:1 ratio on coastal mangroves. The restoration of coastal mangroves stores 5 times more carbon than a terrestrial ecosystem, and there's a 3:1 ratio for seagrass. So I just want those in the MENA region to just keep that and think about the potential that exists there. So now going back to your question, Ian, on generally what are the challenges that we're seeing on the ground from our perspective. I think some of the challenges are very much on the upfront costs of this. The project developer, we're seeing a market evolve, but we're also seeing a market become extremely complex. So you have the voluntary side, you have the compliance side, you have different standards, you have different project types, you have different business models. So for a project developer to identify and originate, or even for a buyer to identify the correct projects can become extremely challenging. What should we buy? What would work for our strategy? And those costs in terms of MRV, in terms of feasibility, can be quite complex. And of course, you touched on some of the other points specifically related to nature-based solutions on carbon rights, on benefit sharing, ensuring that the risks are managed as far as the stakeholders go, and indigenous peoples and vulnerable communities. So that's one aspect of it. I think what, again, from UNDP's perspective, what we are also seeing is this integrity piece of this, where validation verification bodies are and need to do the carbon audit on the validation and verification piece, right? But we have the social integrity piece that we need to be in the DNA of the project. It should not come in as an afterthought. So the idea that project developers, buyers, put that price premium on those high integrity carbon credits and keep that from the design of the project till the end, till the project delivery. So then you're actually ensuring that these are high integrity carbon credits and catching issues, catching risks early on, as opposed to as an afterthought. So I think that's another sort of layer that we're thinking. And again, from UNDP perspective, it's important that the buyers are willing to pay that premium for high integrity credits, right? We are looking to build a high integrity ecosystem where you have the project developers, you have the challenges that they're undergoing, but then you have the buyers who are creating that marketplace to allow. And there's some dysfunctionality sometimes that we see in that. That's not fully aligning. But again, the market is evolving, the market is maturing. From UNDP's perspective, some of the work that we've done, which I think would be interesting for our audience here, we've been working specifically at the jurisdictional level for the voluntary carbon market. So what is jurisdictional level? So instead of doing a project-based carbon, we're doing it at a national or a subnational level, specifically for forestry projects. So the terminology is REDD+ for those of you who are into that sort of stuff. So we're working, when you work at the jurisdictional level, when you work at the subnational level, you're taking away some of the integrity issues. You're addressing additionality, you're addressing the leakage issues of carbon projects before you even, because you're doing it at the subnational level or the jurisdictional level. We're working with countries across the world, UNDP being as international as it is, with several in the Latin American countries and several in Africa to develop these credits using R3 standard, which is one of the most well-renowned prestigious standards on forestry, and ensuring that the governments have the readiness to do the MRV, the safeguards, the reporting, etc., and helping project developers do that. The other thing I wanted to mention specifically was UNDP is involved with the LEAF Coalition. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that. It's a public-private partnership where on the private sector side, we have some of the big corporates like Amazon, Airbnb, H&M, etc., and we have several host countries that are generating these credits. And it's managed by Emergent, which is a nonprofit based out of the United States. And UNDP has just signed, we announced this at COP30, serving as a financial intermediary for 2 countries, for Ghana and for the state of Pará in Brazil, to ensure the generation of high integrity quality credits. So LEAF, as a public-private partnership, has committed to generate 1.5 billion, with a B, high integrity quality credits for forestry. So we're working across the board with the private sector, with the public sector, getting the countries ready for forest projects, but also several others. And I can talk about some of the other initiatives at another time if anyone wants to talk about it. Thank you.
Congratulations on the announcement. Eric, just touching from your side, it'd be interesting to hear, obviously, we're talking about high integrity, nature-based solutions, but also given you guys have been involved in, the technology space as well, it'd be interesting to get a gauge from you in terms of the supply side. Is there enough? Because, there's a lot of buyers out there. You've seen some of the big US companies just come in and hoover up some of the credits. And also maybe touch on the pricing, because, there can be quite a divergence. So maybe you could touch on a couple of those points.
Definitely. And I'd like to almost take it back to where Talal left it off, where he was saying there's a lot of lessons from what's happened in the last 20 years in global carbon markets that can be applied day one in our region. And in some ways, I think we're lucky because a lot of the standards that have been developed over the last few years effectively mean that the process of identifying high quality, high integrity carbon credits has become a lot easier than what it used to be. So today there are standards like the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets that provide a separate standard for a double checking standard on all the carbon credits. Then you have a triple checking from a number of independent ratings agencies that you get yet again provide another check on this. So at the starting point, when you're sort of screening out these kind of credits that meet these criteria, say triple B rated CCP eligible credits, you're starting off with a much smaller pool of the market that you feel kind of confident about and that is high quality from the start. So that makes our job easier. It makes any participants in the markets feel a lot more safe as well about what they do, which is exactly where we want to be, and it's great. It does, however, mean that in some of the categories of, while there are an absolutely vast amount of carbon credits out there, it's no issue in carbon credit supply in general, there are some supply shortages in some of the particular niches. And the most acute, I would say, over the past few years has been in nature-based removals. So in nature-based removals, we saw in H1 2025, one of the most watched benchmark prices almost double. So going from roughly $15, $16 a ton to over $30 a ton. And this remains the case today. So high quality, triple B and above rated nature-based removal credits, very popular instruments for corporates to help as part of their decarbonization journey. They are in short supply, and hence, you see the price spiking very quickly.
And the technology side, just to give the audience a bit of a comparison,
So on the technology side, there is also a lot of really exciting things which are going on, I would say, globally in our region. So if you look at technology at scale globally, we're talking mostly about waste. I mean, there's an insane amount of unmitigated waste all around our world, seeping methane from landfills all over the place. Mitigating these kind of projects can be done pretty scalably across the world and also at a reasonable price. So we're talking about really high quality, really very, very high measurability, because you can actually measure the amount of methane that you're capturing very easily, right? At a reasonable cost, maybe $5 a ton compared to the $30+ a ton we talked about for nature-based removal. So extremely high quality climate action at a reasonable price point. Also something that can be replicated in our region. So as it stands today, we're supporting a client with a e-waste recycling project in KSA, with hopefully many more to come there. Beyond waste, there's of course a lot of exciting things on the tech side, like carbon negative concrete, huge potential. Riyadh is the biggest concrete demolition site globally, due to all of the exciting activity to build Riyadh into something new and exciting. And so the opportunity there to reuse what we have is huge. Direct air capture conditions are probably ideal in the MENA region for that. Direct ocean capture, probably ideal conditions. So there are actually a lot of exciting things, both when it comes to technology and when it comes to nature, where this region can really be a leader going forward.
You got your hands full. Huh?
Definitely, definitely, no issues there.
Yeah, Talal, just going back onto SAFA and some of this exciting plans that you've got going forward, how do you see, the trading side of things, the purchase of credits, the demand side? How do you see from a market perspective?
And it's a discussion that we've made, and especially with a lot of the people in the room here, that demand is there, but for a very specific type of product or a solution. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the supply for it yet. And it's the origination of credits from our region. And it's good and exciting to see that Eric mentioned around 25 projects coming out of Saudi. But it's also a discussion that we need to do what's coming out of Bahrain as well. And I believe there is demand for money and there is for nature-based solution, and there is capital to be poured in, but there's yet a project to be developed. I think credit origination from the region is still an issue, and it's still a big challenge. And I think everyone should play part and consider working on project development and putting capital in project development. And this is what we're trying to do here in Safa. We're trying to explore what kind of nature-based solution projects that can be developed here in Bahrain, what kind of ecosystems that can be restored and that can generate a serious amount of carbon credits to match the demand for Bahraini companies, specifically, and Bahraini credits. And that's the issue. So although it's one planet, but we believe that there's more demand to be for nature-based solutions or for credits that are generated from a specific region or a specific space. And that's unfortunate because what we've realized is the market has not yet developed to treat nature-based solutions and carbon credits as investment vehicles or asset classes. What we've seen is that it's more of a environmental contribution, more of a charity type of CSR product. And I think now is the time for that shift to happen towards more of an investment vehicle, an asset class where people can realize gains out of it. Supply is currently non-existent for Bahraini credits, but Safa is working on identifying several projects. I think there's potential with seagrass and probably oyster beds, which we discussed just yesterday with the UNDP, and there's some potential there. So it's exciting times for us, but we have to move very fast to develop the credits for the market that require them here in Bahrain.
That's great to hear. And it goes back to what Nam was saying regarding the environmental benefit of mangrove swamps. You mentioned, as we know, 4 or 5 times terrestrial trees. Bahrain's sitting on, a lot of mangrove swamps, and it's growing, so there's opportunities to monetize that incredible nature-based value right here on our doorsteps. And, I'm just watching the time here. Just lastly on regulation, Simon, can you maybe give the audience a little bit of an idea on the regulation shaping the market? Obviously, we've got CBAM, we've got CORSIA, because it is going to be a massive driver for the market as other countries respond to CBAM, etc. So it'd be great to get your insights from that.
Sure. I mean, I'll be very brief on CBAM. We could talk for hours on that. So that CBAM came into force at the beginning of this year, and it essentially places a carbon fee on industrial products coming into the EU to try to level the playing field, as they say, between producers in the EU, where they pay a relatively high carbon price, and producers outside the EU, where often they don't. And I mean, it does many things, I think. Firstly, it brings in a new group of sort of stakeholders into the carbon space, because it turns carbon pricing from a largely environmental discussion into a sort of geopolitical trade discussion, which is interesting and challenging in many ways. It extends carbon pricing, so we are seeing the expansion of markets in reaction to CBAM, because one way to negate the impact is to have carbon pricing mechanisms in those export countries, and we see that in China, Turkey, Brazil, India. So we are seeing policy impacts already from CBAM. And I mean, I think the ultimate end goal, or maybe that's too strong, but one very positive outcome that we're seeing, which is happening now between the EU and the UK, is carbon market linkage. So the UK has a compliance market. It is linking, negotiations are underway with the EU ETS, the EU's market. That will deliver price harmonization, convergence, and that really is the ultimate sort of leveling of the playing field when it comes to carbon prices. So we're seeing developments like that, which are very powerful, I think, because it improves the ability to reduce emissions at lowest cost.
Thanks. And just, we've now sort of run out of time, so I just want to, for each of the panel guests here, just crystal ball time, crystal ball gazing time. Can you give me, from each of the panelists, I guess looking out to 2030, one major trend that you expect, as I say, over the next 5 years, and what would really need to happen to unblock that? Is there a major block that needs to happen in parallel to maximize that trend? Simon?
I'll say digitalization, which we haven't really talked about, but historically carbon markets have been quite analog markets, quite old-fashioned, which has led to lots of challenges, fragmentation. We're seeing this digital transformation all the way through the value chain, from the way that credits are originated through to how they're bought and traded and retired. And that unlocks many, many problems. And it's really exciting to see this sort of technological improvement and an increase in sophistication. So I think we're going to see a lot of that in the next 5 years.
Talal?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Simon said. I think technology shift is the biggest change that we'll see. But I think it is as well for the region. And I believe probably within the next 5 years, the MENA has the potential to become the hub for high integrity, high credible nature-based solution credits. And I think with the help of technology, with the help of project development and credit origination and just the drive from everyone, the MENA would be the leading region for nature-based solutions.
Okay, I've just got a tap on my shoulder, but you know what? Let's throw caution to the wind. Nam and Eric.
I am going to agree with the rest of the panel and say digitization, but I'm going to use the AI word here and add on to that, because I do think that is the next frontier as far as not just all of our world, but even our world in the carbon markets and MRV. So I will say that, and I know we need to wrap up, but I will say that UNDP is doing work in that, and we are building AI tools. We are cognizant of the fact as a development organization, of course, of the energy and water resource intensiveness of it, but also making things efficient by using AI tools. So we are building deforestation machine learning tools, we're building registries for countries, helping digitize that, and really, and this is where for the MENA region, thinking about how the blue carbon systems could be digitized in terms of MRV, which can be a challenge in this space. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take it a different direction. So I think regulation is the one and major driver for this market going forward. It's amazing the voluntary engagement the corporates have provided to make this market pick up and grow in these early years. But for it to take it to the next step ahead, we're going to have regulation for measuring emissions, and we're going to have ETS systems. And I think we'll all be amazed 2 or 3 years ahead how far this region will have come on that topic by then.
Thanks so much, everyone. We run out of time. Some great comments, and really greatly appreciate the panel for all the time that they've spent and insights. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.